Huron Cultural Campus and the steering committee for SPARC. And this is when I first met David Barnard. We were in transition over in Vancouver on a project called the Self-Employed Arts-Related Contractors for Hire program. The search program, which was all about working with artists to help them find ways to create a sustainable income from their cultural and creative work. So, in that same milieu.
Neither of us had gray, neither of us had beards.
Other than that, he looked identical. In addition to David, and David will be more or less facilitating, I think, this kind of a session to the extent that you
Wish me luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
For those of you, we'll try to urge Clayton to express himself a bit more. Clayton's joining us from, as most of us probably already know, he's a board member of CARFAC and is the executive director of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective. Ashley at Manitowabi. Okay. Sure. Is from the Debajehmujig.
Debajehmujig. It's like thingamajig.
But it's not a thingamajig.
Right. But it is on Manitoulin Island.
It's a thingamajig on Manitoulin Island.
and he's joined by his colleague and friend Bruce Naokwegijig.
Yep.
Not close enough. Close enough. Yeah, the story of my life. Who's also from
Debajehmujig.
Thingamajig.
On Manitoulin.
I just want to get it right.
You
got it. On Manitoulin Island. David's our moderator. Thanks, guys.
What Michael didn't say is that he's the general manager at the Huron Cultural Campus, which is based in Aurelia.
Yep.
And they're doing some pretty interesting programming there. Interesting name, Huronia. I wonder what's going to come of that along the way.
A name change.
So, Clayton, I think, is the instigator behind this particular session. And it's in a really important discussion which got started last night. A group of us over dinner began to talk about the Massey report, which came out in the 50s. It led to the development of the Canada Council and was really instrumental in sort of setting the tone and helping to create policy related to the development of arts and culture in Canada. And here we are, more than 60 years later, and it's being re-examined just in terms of, okay, how things changed. Well, obviously in the time and place that it was created, many voices, many perspectives were not necessarily included. So that's one thing to consider. And if you read the statement that was provided by Joahnna Berti from Debajehmujig, it really resonates for me because I've been working with Heritage now for 10 years. And it strikes me that often at the table, when we're discussing applications that are being made by various applicants, and I'll just read this. Funders often have the inherent bias about the quality of our work before they see it, particularly because we are rural, and partially because we're also community-based. And their understanding of those things does not actually include our context and reality. They do not understand until they see and experience. And they don't get this far very often. And I think that that is absolutely true. So that sort of sets a big context because here we are, this is SPARC. This is about rural and remote communities, the performing arts in all its various forms. And one of the key things that comes up again and again as an issue is that artists struggle to make a living in this context. Often they have to migrate to the south, to urban centers, in order to be the artists that they want to be. So this discussion is about, that the conundrum of how to make a living as an artist in a rural context. It's about how to value what you do, and it's about how it is that the culture around it doesn't seem to understand the value that we have. So I'm going to turn it over to Clayton first, just to set up something which I think you're going to find fascinating, which is the video.
So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to acknowledge this amazing Clayton, Ontario hat that my friend Sandy came and gave me. I found out that I was coming to this event and went to Clayton, Ontario and bought a hat because the town's name is my name. So I've never been to Clayton, Ontario before, but there's this thing where it's like it's the stuff outside of the programs at these conferences that is really what makes them kind of special. And I'm like, that is such a thoughtful, bizarre gift. It's also orange, which I wear orange often. I'm wearing pink today, so it totally clashes. And I'm going to cherish this forever. I'm going to take it off right now because I don't wear ball caps, and it is super uncomfortable. But I'm going to put it up on my wall at home, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to think about SPARC and Cobalt for the rest of my life, even though this isn't a hat that says Cobalt. So that all being said, it's funny, I wanted to just quickly say a big shift that's happened in the entire arts ecology is sort of like the act of listening. And this panel, I actually didn't instigate. I did, but I didn't. It's complicated. And I'm going to give you like a really fast, like how this happened. So a while back, I had already agreed to come to SPARC, but it was just to attend. And I just wrote like this letter, and it was like this letter to be like, you know, I know that SPARC is already in motion. This is the third one, but it didn't, when it initiated itself, didn't have the setup to have presenters fees in place. And that's this sort of thing, like as professionals ourselves, like these fees, like in academia, they're not expected because the university's covering things. But out when we have jobs, like if you're going to travel across the country to go talk, you know, it's kind of like getting paid even like a couple $100 or something. It makes a big deal. So I wrote this letter, and it was kind of pushy, and it was one of those cranky letters, and I was really respectful, but I kind of wanted to push a little bit to be like hoping for change. And you know, the thing is, they listened. They were like ridiculously thankful and responsive. They were overly trying to call me and be like, you know, can we talk about this? We want to learn more. Can we program something? And then, you know, I just said, well, you should talk to some of these groups, and you know, those are the advocacy groups that I would talk to. And they did that. They went and called different places, and they started programming people, and then those places started calling me and asking me to sit on that panel without knowing that I was the one that had caused all this. And I was just like, oh man, that's depressing. But in the end, it's also kind of like, whatever, maybe it's synchronicity. I've heard that a lot the last couple days, that things just align, and maybe it was meant that this panel should happen. And at the same time, I've been doing a lot of research into the formation of artist-run culture, and I recently came across a paper that I'll talk about later, but this video which connects to it. And so this is a video that, like a micro-documentary, 6 minutes, so we're not going to be long, but 6 minutes long. It's an interview with Greg Curnow about the formation of an artists union, which inevitably became CARFAC, which is I'm now on the board of, and I'm just gonna play it instead of setting it up, because honestly, like I've already said, this is like super, like this is from 1975, so like I wasn't born when this was coming out.
London, Ontario may seem an unlikely place to look for a revolution in Canadian culture, but one of the seeds of it was sown a few years back by a number of painters who were imprisoned enough to start a union for artists. Greg Curnow, painter and ardent cyclist, was one of them. He and fellow painters Jack Chambers and John Boyle were founding members of CAR, Canadian Artists Representation. CAR is changing the ways in which galleries deal with artists.
I would say that CAR came out of a general attitude here. It came out of an attitude that was forced on us by the fact that the London Art Gallery, which had a completely Canadian staff, by the way, was not sympathetic, particularly to the artists working in the city. There were a number of reasons for this, but generally speaking, we felt we were not being treated seriously and our work was not being purchased. It was I suppose, quite an academic institution, or I don't know how you describe it, but it came out of that, and consequently all the artists got together on that issue. We all did. We were used to getting together on issues. I'll do the trail break.
Curno's fellow Londoner Jack Chambers became interested in starting an association of artists after learning from the National Gallery that it intended to reproduce his paintings with or without his permission and distribute them for educational purposes without payment, naturally. That letter touched a sore nerve. Once again, artists were expected to donate their work for a good cause while everyone else associated with the project was paid. As Chambers and Curno saw it, it was another instance of the system denying artists their right to be professionals.
Well, again, it comes from our own experiences here that you have to get artists together. You know, the romantic notion of the artist alone working in a garret makes the artist completely powerless. The other thing that is very important in this is the attitude that both Jack and I had, and I think you'd say this of the sculptors in West Lorne, Walt Rager, and Ed Zelenak, a notion of having a profession and of being a working professional in your trade or your profession, which was as an artist or as a painter. Now you also have to have that attitude, and that is the only way that you can approach people in other sectors of the economy. So we in London have stressed our economic value to London. The fact that we sold paintings, that there was a financial turnover, that we brought attention to the city, but we've always taken it on that basis, you know, that it was our vocation, our job.
Part of Curno's job, as he saw it, was to respond in a political way to the world around him. In 1968, he was commissioned to paint a mural for Dorval Airport in Montreal. In his painting, a figure resembling President Lyndon Johnson could be seen flying through the air and dropping bombs. U.S. customs officers saw the mural, complained, and within 36 hours the mural was taken down. If Curno is anti-American, and he is, one of the chief causes is the prevalence of Americans in key cultural posts in Canada. This dependence on foreign experts for Curno is a hangover of our colonial mentality.
I have no intention of imposing my ideas or my identity on somebody else. I'm quite sensitive about that. I suppose also I'm quite sensitive to the fact that there aren't very many people who feel that way. And particularly the people that in increasing numbers come up here from the States to run our art galleries and to teach in our schools that don't feel that way at all. They are fully aware of the fact that they come from the center of the world and are quite prepared to show us the way to do it. And this is, of course, augmented by the dominance of our media, all of our media, by American sources, by the Associated Press and United Press International and the TV stations, you name it. Every area of our popular culture is dominated by American materials.
A few years ago, the Art Gallery of Ontario appointed a new chief curator. He was an American, Richard Wattenmaker. The appointment was greeted with protests from people, Greg Curno among them, angry at seeing yet another important position go to a non-Canadian.
When you have people in these culturally sensitive positions, which we have right across the country, it's really amazing when you consider the number of Americans in sensitive cultural positions in Canada. And it's virtually impossible to have a continuity of trained Canadians going in these positions, of people who grow up with and are aware of the culture, who grow up and are aware of the artists in the community or the artists in the country as a whole. Just about impossible to achieve that when you keep bringing in experts who bring with them this attitude that they come from the cultural center of the world.
The list of institutions in Canada directed by foreign nationals is a long one and is growing. These are only a few. Is there something going on here that we don't understand? Is it really true that there are no trained Canadian professionals capable of filling positions so crucial to the fostering of a Canadian culture? Or do we still believe, as we used to, that foreigners can do everything better? If the protests against American university teachers and cultural administrators seem to many Canadians to be churlish and narrowly nationalistic, well, maybe it's because we've never really completed that phase of our evolution which every country needs if it's going to survive. The determination to make tough decisions in our own interest.
So that's pretty little, you know, maybe some of the Canadian anti-American stuff isn't super relevant today, or maybe it's more relevant, I have no idea. It's depending on you as individuals. But when I watched this, I laughed like so fucking hard. I was like, everything in there is like, wow, these are the exact arguments that I use with the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective every day. Why, when people say, well, we'll have a non-Indigenous person that curate the Indigenous collection at the Art Gallery of Ontario or anywhere else, and I'm like, you know, there's like tons of qualified people that could be doing this job that could actually perpetuate representation of the community itself, as opposed to bringing some other outsider in that supposedly knows best. I mean, like, there's this whole thing of like how much those could be replaced, but also just how weird it is listening to artists talking about fighting for their rights, and like this video is like almost 50 years old. Like, I still have people say, oh well, artist fees are like a new idea, you know, you can't rush those things. So should I just keep talking? Do you want to jump in a bit, or?
I guess just for our part too, like, this is totally with visual arts. For us, it's totally about performance arts. And for Debajehmujig, there is one of our major things, which is creating shows, performances, and also one of our big things is going into communities and offering workshops to youth, students, businesses, whatever they request from us. And to this day, we still get asked that same thing. Can you come in for $50? A workshop, just recently again, Joahnna sent me an email. One of the schools on our island has just asked us if we would like to come and do a presentation from 1 to 3 at the school in Little Kern. It is their picnic day. So what they usually do is they have a some sort of performance or open karaoke, some sort of presentation with the students, I guess, that the teachers put on for the kids. They scrapped that idea, I don't know why. So our standard fee was offered to them, and they came back with, well, we don't have that much, can you do it for this? Which was, and so Joahnna offered back and said, well, if you can come up with at least $500, you know, and then, you know, we can think about coming over. So with that in mind, like, we're supposed to be a professional theater company and asking for these types of fees. Well, even the schools are having difficulty purchasing artists and with those artist fees. So what's the problem here? Is it the school doesn't have money for us and they don't want to pay for us? That's what I think. And if we do remember, like, the arts and culture funding has been cut, slashed, and dropped a lot. I don't know what the world is like out there now. So it's, again, on that perspective, okay, yeah, you're offering me $500, so it's like talking to the school or going back to the school boards and saying, where's your money? How come you guys have no money also? So that's where my kind of conversation would go with that, and going upstream to find out where the dam is, if you will, and trying to find the source of how come there's no money left for the schools to purchase artists to come in and do their work. So that's a major issue that we're still facing with today. And liking this video, it totally sets it up to exactly what we're conversating about here. Yeah, and so right till this day, we're still being asked to chop down your fees or, you know, your work. And so sometimes we just say no. It's like, and so for us also too, like, man, we love doing this. So it's like, you know what, we're not doing anything that day, right? Let's take the $50 and go in there and be with the kids, right? So the other mentality of why you love to do this is there in the forefront, right? Of course you want to get paid. So the other part turns around for me and for artists, performing artists, workshop artists, that driven goal to, yeah, there's nothing going on, I'll take the $50 and I'll go and give them my experience, my teachings and goodness, and go into the classroom with it. Again, if you were to take on the total mentality of, well, you don't have $500 for me, well, I'm not going, you'll never get work, right? That's that balance in between the two of needing recognition for your work via dollars. You're always getting recognition for the work you do, but you'll never hear like, oh, I actually came in. Yeah, we gave him $2,000 to sit here for 2 hours. No, it's never talked about that, right? It's, yeah, I actually came in and this great workshop that he did, and, right? So the language is totally different.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, mentality and I guess in the community, because we're part of Wukumakong and we're also part of the next town, it's Manitowabi. So part of that too is, yeah, we get offered to do workshops for free, or you come do this. Oh yeah, we would love to do that. But then we have these other commitments to create these performances and other things that we have to get ready for, and it's you want to say yes all the time, but it's like, do you want them to hear you say no all the time? No. It's like,
There's something too about how, like, so if you take $50 from someone and you do it and you don't complain or make it hard, then the next time they come back, that's what they offer, because you've established that's what they can get away with almost, right? But then there's the privilege that has to be acknowledged of having the time and the resources to actually go and make change. And how, like, to go to the school board, or to go higher up to like the Board of Education, or to go to like the Ministry of Education and be like, I expect this. Well, when are you supposed to have the time to do that when you're only making $50?
Yeah.
Right? Like, sure, I'll just get in my car and spend time as a lobbyist, and because I don't have a family and mortgages to pay and stuff.
So, okay, what's the role then of the organizations that's their mandate? CARFAC. I mean, any of the musicians union, CARFAC, the service organizations like PAC for theater, or talk about that a little bit, because I think it's true. You're busy as creators. So it's difficult to get to that logjam wherever it is.
Yeah.
But somebody does need to get there, obviously.
So there's like this whole. So I a lot of people that know me always get worried about how active I am and how much I do, and that I overcommit to things, and I put in way too much time and all this kind of stuff. And part of it is that when you don't have anything, you're like hungry, and like you get this kind of like this should be this needs to happen. You push harder, you fight. It's like a rights-based social justice issue to you. You're in it, and it's the money isn't important. And then just enough money to survive is offered. Not to be prosperous, just to survive. And you're so grateful for it that losing it becomes everything. And I would argue that a lot of groups, including CARFAC that I'm on the board of, have fallen into that kind of trap of like, they don't really represent, like like that video and that kind of like standing up and publicly like calling things out on the news. I haven't seen CARFAC do that maybe once in the last 10 years, and like they have staff in every province of the country now. So you'd assume that in theory, if there's all these people working, that this would be happening more, that there'd be public activation. But the thing is, like, how do you, like, this? I used to get in huge arguments with the previous executive director of CARFAC for like a large, like the last 10 years of my life, where I would say, how is it that you can take money from an operating grant from the Ontario government and then be the person that has to actively pursue opposing them in certain things and fighting for changes. Like, how does that work? And they're like, well, it's not really how it works. I'm like, no, it is. That's where your livelihood comes from, right? Is the money comes from the government. So how is it that you're able to be on the opposite side of the table effectively? And I'm not like saying that they can't, but I was really just asking that because to me it seemed weird. And I'm like, because there you go. Like, why would I go? Like, there are funders in the room and like people that I care about. Am I gonna be like just terribly like, you know? Like, of course not. Like, even if I disagree, I'm like, these are people that I work with and are part of my life. Like, I'm not gonna treat them that way. And it's almost like with an activist stance, it's easier to have the opposite side be anonymous. But when it comes to like the amount of work that's needed, I don't know. There's also something weird about how like I've always found it strange. I'm like, hey, we need to like change things in Parliament. I'm like, well, cool, we should hire artists to do it. And I'm like, or I could get lawyers, but whatever, you know. Like, I don't want to push buttons that level, but like I feel that the mentality of change kind of gets exhausted by so many people doing their own thing and not being willing to kind of like come together and contribute. Like, it's like I almost feel like right now I'm toning down what I do and saying no more, because by overcommitting, I'm establishing that this is the level of commitment that's needed to be able to do this. And it's sending a message to people that are like, oh, well then I don't want to be involved. I don't want to do what Clayton does, you know? And that can't be, like, we have to be like part of this whole bigger thing where I'm not this loud voice, I'm just in a crowd of very, very many loud voices.
Yeah, education is one of our major things at Debajehmujig, learning and educating. We had a young fella come to us there 3 years ago. We have a brand new recording studio there, and he's seen it. So this is the mentality I see that everybody may have. Is they see the finished product, they see the end of your show, they see your song, they see your music video, they see your art piece, and it's the finished product, if you will. That's the joy in it there. It's like, oh, that's great, it's beautiful, right? But you're not seeing how many hours it actually took to develop that, how many thoughts you went through and destroyed yourself over and fought with yourself and scrapped those ideas, went down a new path with a new one. So when I'm teachers or other people want you to do things, that's one of the things that they don't understand about an artist, how many hours. So, like for myself, improvisational theater, I'm an improvisational theater coach. I didn't just come up with this, you know, I just didn't read it off a book and, you know, hey, yeah, you know, pay me $50 because, you know, I just learned this 20 minutes ago. I've been playing improv for like 15 years. I've been offering improv workshops for these same times, teaching all of our students in this great work. So
yeah, there's that different dialogue too. It's like some people assume you know everything also too. So say put on this workshop, okay.
yeah.
Do I know anything about this?
So going back to the young fellow, so I'm gonna say like 15 years. You want 15 years of learning and doing, and you want me to pay $50. You want to pay me $50. So this young fellow who came in, I think he had that same mentality as the finished product. I want to get to the finished product. So he came in with his guitar, and he's like, yeah, I'd like to sit in with Jason there, the sound guy, and I just want to sit and record and do some songs like today. I'm like, all right, okay. And I was like, well, before you get there, let's go into the studio and let's listen to your songs. Let's see what you got, right? Let's hear your voice. Do you have any completed songs? No, not yet. I was like, oh, jeez. Well, let's hear what you got. Starts playing. He's playing these chords that are not chords. He's just putting his fingers places, right? They're chords, of course, like a G minor eighth. had ninth or something, you know. Then he started singing it, but his voice wasn't there. He wasn't, you know, he didn't have chorus and all of that in the song, and he had no lyrics. He was just making up as he goes. So I had that conversation with him. I said, do you think you're going to have a finished product just like that when you come in here and asking that if you could use the studio? It's like, okay, so this is the factors that I can see right away. Your voice isn't ready. Your guitar licks aren't ready. You don't even have a chorus and verse going back and forth. So what you're going to be doing up there with Jason is you're going to be, okay, let's record this, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, no, I don't like that. Can we start again? So now you're using up Jason's time via doing something, scrapping it, and starting again. Oh, I messed up, right? So I had that whole conversation with him. It's like, you got to get some vocal training into you. You got to literally go and figure out what this song is going to be and get those lyrics down on paper so that if you're in front of me and you have memory block via nerves, then at least you can keep going through your songs. So just telling him about, yeah, you have to practice, man. Practice, practice, practice. Like, you want to come in here and do 3 songs and just zip it up like that? It's like, oh, it's not going to work. You're going to sound not good. So I told him about that. Go and get some vocal trainings. Look it up on YouTube is what I told him. Thinking about him not being able to go to vocal class or something. But again, that education of telling him he has to work at this. Go and learn about these things. Learn about what it's like to use your voice. And so, like, that's where I think everybody just looks at the finished product. Like our performances, theater show, people are like, oh, that's really good, you're a really good actor, right? Well, it took 4 weeks to actually get that actor playing that role really well. So it wasn't just like, okay, 2 days before the show was up, okay, let's have your character come out. No, it's developing that character over that 4 weeks to have a greater awareness of being that person. So if something surreal or serendipity comes out, it's not you reacting on stage, it's this character acting on stage, right? Reacting. So that big understanding of education and saying the finished product is not the thing. The working up to it is the thing.
I was thinking, Greg Kerno, he talked about the artists seeing themselves in their vocation as a professional. And that's a turning point often in a person's career where feeling like you've established a bar, you've done that practice that you're talking about, you put the time in, and you've created something which is like really good, professional, however you want to apply that. The challenge often is, I appreciate what Joanna wrote about how the view of funders towards, the work that happens in rural communities often is devalued just because it's work.
Yeah.
I think for artists based in rural communities, there's another dilemma, which is you can work to that point, get to a professional level, and yet your own peers, your own community itself, somehow doesn't see the value in you. They'll pay a decent fee for the artist that has driven down the road from somewhere else because they're seen as coming, somehow they're going to be better than somebody that lives locally. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, of course,
That's a lot.
of course we use a lot of outside resources ourselves, like not to diminish that either, especially for Debajehmujig. When we were growing up, or I guess, there was a lot of outside artists coming in and teaching us. But what did we do? We brought them in. Thank you. Can I keep all this now? And all these exercises and all this? Okay, I'm keeping it now, and I'm going to use them now. So now I don't need you to come back in anymore. So it's taking that, accumulating it, and knowing all that stuff that he wants to give you, and now turning around and going, can I share this now? Right? So the need to bring somebody else in isn't there so much. Like, just recently we had the big resigning of the one curatorial lady in the Alberta Museum? No. She resigned because of the colonial thoughts that she was being forced on.
Open space.
Open space,
In
that was it.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You mean
France?
Keegan and Victor? Oh, France Rebenier.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the executive director is now left, or got resigned, or conceded to being fired. I'm not really sure how it works, but anyway.
Yeah, she made a big write-up about how it's like you gave me this role, you opened this role up for a native person, but then now you're still saying no.
Yeah.
You cannot run it the way you want to run it because we're on the top still. That mentality is still out there, and trying to we know it has to break, but see, it's those uppers who like, no, I know because I'm the expert, right? And it's for people way up there, it's like you're too expert for us. You know, your head is so high up there that you're not down on the ground with us anymore. Yeah, that's about it for that.
Just a comment that I wanted to ask is like, so Debajehmujig does a lot of community engaged activations, both locally and all over the place. And I know that a lot of funders that deal with the arts, they understand the value in that, but the public often doesn't. So when I say that, like, how much did that youth that came in and had apparently a lot of your time coaching them on moving forward, how much did they pay for that session? Like, did they pay you for that time?
No.
Because, but that's the thing, like, a lot of people out of other industries would be shocked to find out that that wasn't like a paid service you were providing, right? And part of that is that, like, in a way, some of these engagements, the activation of getting that youth from that point further is the benefit. Like, that's the outcome. Like, that it is, like, but there is this sort of thing of like, well, show us the painting that there was a result, or show us the album that was there, or show us the play that's there. And I'm like, sometimes those things don't happen. We don't get that far because the community isn't ready for it. And does that mean that, you know, there's no money that should be changing hands? Does that mean you shouldn't have jobs? I'm like, there's almost a, like, working with Amatagzi over the last 10 years.
Everybody who that is.
So Amatagzi is a similar organization to Debajehmujig that works at a Nipissing First Nation. And I say similar because it has different focuses and different artistic directions, but it also works in, you know, dance and theater. They follow a lot of the same methodologies, and over the years they've worked with Debaj a lot. And everyone hangs out. It's great. It's all, we all know each other to a degree. Well, I met Ashley for the first time with this. It's been great. What was it? So like when you're working with community, like the outcomes aren't guaranteed. So it's not like I could dictate what's going to happen at the end. But that work that's involved is actually way more work than me just setting out to make a painting. If I have to have the community involved, it's like coordinating so many people. It's putting in so many more hours. It's putting in so much more to it than just setting out with like a dictated path and saying everyone has to follow it. It's so much, like, collaboration isn't easy. So I wanted to throw that out there because I also thought about how much the focus had shifted towards helping that youth, and how I was like, you know, you're not like, no one knows how much effort you put in on an ongoing basis behind the scenes. And
how do you value that?
Oh, and I can see Liz from OTF wanting to jump in.
Well, I had a question. I also, I work at the Ontario Twin Foundation, but I've been there for a year and a half, and prior to that I was the ED of a community arts organization in Toronto for 7 or 8 years, and practiced as a community engaged artist. So that's something like that context. I understand the incredible amount of work it takes to manage all those relationships, and you're not only an artist, but you have a whole lot of other skill sets, and you need to, because you're almost like a frontline worker. But I actually want to jump back to, you had posed, David, a question about the role of CARFAC and PAC, these art service organizations, to advocate for artist fees, and I wanted to point out that there is no arts service organization for community engaged arts. There's not anymore. There used to be, but it was set up to serve ASOs, I think, like specifically, or arts councils, and not community engaged. It was called Community Arts Ontario, but it was an arts service organization for kind of smaller arts councils. So it doesn't exist anymore, and there have been some conversations at a funder level like this. I think this is kind of essential because there's a lot of advocacy that needs to be done for people doing community engaged work, because it doesn't, on the one hand, funders are going in a direction where they see the important work in the way that community engaged organizations are engaging audiences that haven't been engaged before, but it's not necessarily recognized, or it's not funded at a level that is really needed. It's a lot more complex than you know, putting up an art exhibit on walls or doing putting on a play, like, because you're managing all those relationships in community. So there's that, and I was also thinking around arts education. Is there an arts service organization that's advocating around fees for arts educators? I don't think there is. And community arts and arts education is, we know at the OAC, those two offices have now, a lot of them are looking quite similar now.
So CARFAC has generic guidelines that are like for a presentation or a workshop that is under 4 hours in length and time is approximately $350. That's for an individual.
Yeah.
And then if it's a day rate, it's equivalent to about like $550. So, but these are for like working professional fees, because the people like will say, well, I couldn't do that if I'm hiring somebody to come in for 3 weeks and do workshops every day. Like that's you know, like $7,500, right, or something like or more, right? Like some kind of 10 grand for a month. Like that sounds high. And I'm like, but it's a guideline because it's based on the fact that most professional artists are asked to come in, sit for one set period of time, talk, do one set workshop, and then that's it. So the idea is that, like, oh, well, come in for 2 hours and do this, like your presentation, right? And you're like, well, could you go and work in another town that day? So then why are you only getting paid for 2 hours? Like, your company has to write the whole day off, right? You can't go do other things. But, you know, if you're only getting paid for those 2 hours, that doesn't really pay for the other 6 hours that everyone was at work that day, right? Yeah. So there's just these kind of, like, they want it to be like the standards are sort of a catch-all, but yeah, they're not. So the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective is engaging with actions with CARFAC National about the implementation of a curatorial fee schedule to go along with their for independent curators that are outside of institutions. And the difficulty is that an artist fee schedule for a visual artist is based almost like on a licensing agreement to present work for a period of time. So it's very much under the understanding that the work is finished when it comes in, it's just putting it up. It isn't about the compensation for the creation of that work or the time involved. And now we're having to shift the conversation to how would you can't have just here's $5,000 for a curator. Like, I could put a show up in one day and do a really poor job and get paid $5,000. That's amazing. Or that's 6 months of my life and it's still $5,000. Like, that doesn't work. So you have to start thinking about time and the effort that's put in, and almost like the qualifications level, like some kind of sliding scale, at which point you're starting to go, well, this is starting to sound like the way that ACTRA or Equity pursues the way that it handles its fee schedules as a union, which is what CARFAC set out to be in the beginning. And I know that there's like all these barriers, and I'm not saying that we're going to end up having a union. It's more just that if the recommendations made to governments on how to handle these things don't make sense, they won't be employed. And if they are not, if we make recommendations as a group that all we need to get paid is $50 to go do that, people that don't care about the arts will be more than happy to only give $50 to that school to have them pay you. You know, like, they don't want to care until they have to, right? Yeah. So
That's one of the, we got a question in the back there.
I just had to state, I'm Jack from Motorzo Dance Theatre, and we've been in business almost 30 years now, so I've gone through the working full-time, creating the company at nights and weekends, and then into a full-time company, and trying to sustain that, and it's extremely painful even 30 years later. However, I think one thing I've learned is that as artists, even if funders have money available, we as artists are not always recipients of that extra money. So what I feel like our job has been lately is we put the value on what we're worth, and no has become much more a part of our vocabulary. Fundraisers are always asking us to do stuff, so I've learned to say, this is a $3,000 show we're giving you. We will do it at cost for $800. We are donating $2,200 to you.
Yeah.
So I've just found other ways to present the value, because if we don't individually start doing value, because if we're waiting for the collectiveness to all happen, I don't know if the culture will ever change, or the understanding will ever change. However, if we independently do it as individual artists across the country, then people will know that there is a value to you doing this gig, or you doing that fundraiser, or you doing that school show. And it's a hard thing, because as artists, our purpose is not the money, it's the work, it's the children, it's that thing. And that's been a big lesson for me to realize I've got to run them parallel, because if I don't, I'll always be donating and I'll always be scrambling.
Yeah.
So no has become a bigger part. And I just want to throw you a quick example. It happened many years ago before I actually knew better, but I was in with the York Region Board of Education in Toronto, north of Toronto, and they asked us to do this big project, and they wanted us to do several visits and teach all these kids part of our show and incorporate them at this big finale at a big theater, and blah, blah, blah. They said, come up with the budget. I came up with the budget, and at that time, it was going to be 8 hours a day, and it was $100 per person that got paid. Not a lot hourly rate, it's very minimum, and they were astounded when I presented it to the board and the teachers that were in the boardroom. And they just went, oh, we don't have that. So I said, well, what do you have? And it was literally half. So I said, okay, well, then we can go back to the drawing board and see what we can present to you. And I had one of the board from the school of the education system say, well, teachers, they do a lot of volunteer work to do these kinds of things, to give extracurricular activity to the students. And before I could even catch myself, I said, that's wonderful. And I said, I think that's a great thing they do. I said, however, do realize the teachers have a healthy salary from which to base their volunteer work from. Yeah. This is our bread and butter. Yeah. And everything went very quiet, and I sort of went, ooh, okay. And I said it very nicely, like I did now. I wasn't like, and I sort of went, ooh, okay. And it was a very quiet room, but the point was, and we went back and we said, we can do half that amount of work. So we just cut the project in half, and so this is what we. But it was from then on I realized, yeah, if I don't tell them this is what it's worth, and I'm giving you, and I'm telling them, you give me someone who makes $100 a day, who's a teacher in the education system, please bring them forward. And then they don't have an answer to that, so then they go, oh, that's right, you are a professional, you are an adult who has to pay. So I just say all that to say that if we can individually start doing it, and if it starts happening across, and we start putting value to our work and do say no when we need to. And sometimes there are things you'll do because it's going to blossom into something else. There are investing things that we do for a lot less money or give, but it has to be an investment because something else is going to happen. Then we just need to stand up. So I'm not pro-union. I've worked with them before. I have a lot of problem with that, only because I know what it's like to be a director and a founder of a company and not being able to pay union dues. Yeah. We wouldn't exist today if I had to do that, for sure. Yeah. So I'm not really pro that, but I am pro let's start individually putting value on us as employees in Canada. So anyway, we wanted to share that because I think that's something we can do today.
So I'm really agreeing with what you're saying, and maybe I'll say what I'm pro instead of all the things that I'm not or all the problems. So very fast, I remember for years looking at the funding bodies, the people that give out the checks to an organization or an individual as the people that you had to convince that they needed to change to either give more or less or something. And like, to a degree, that's true. Like those jurors, like that whole system, that is who you're convincing, because that's the system there. But the idea that the system has a giant amount or more, I lost that over time. And the reason for it was that there was, like, years back, there was this whole, like, North Bay divisive event where, like, you know, the curator at the art gallery had been fired, and he created, like, this public group that was friends of that place to try to, like, rally to kind of pull resources out of it, and it was super divisive. But what was fascinating was that this organization had an arm's length relationship to the municipality and got money from the municipality to operate under a defined set of parameters. And the group that's trying to lobby to push this is going to the organization itself and asking them and fighting them to carve part of themselves off to them. And I was like, watching it all, I'm like, this is so funny. Like, everything you're saying is kind of relevant. Why the hell aren't you over at the municipality arguing this? Like, you're going to this incorporated group and asking them to, like, cut off one of their arms and hand it to you. You need to be talking to the people, the actual source of things. And I thought more about that and thought, well, why the hell do I complain to the Ontario Arts Council or the Canada Council about things? Like, everybody I see there is working so freaking hard all the time and you're constantly trying to get things out the door. Why am I not complaining that the government isn't giving them the resources they need to succeed? Right? Like, that's the real issue here, is that and then when you go to the government, they'll try to download it down the line and say, well, you know, like, we're in an election, there's an election a week away, right, in the province, and Vic Fideli, you know, like, ex-interim PC party, is the ex-mayor of North Bay, you know, so I said, how do you get the arts as an election issue? And he says, you have to have it that all year round, forever, we're talking about it on the radio as an actual issue, because if it's not an issue that the public is talking about outside of an election, why would we suddenly start talking about it during an election? And I was like, wow, that's depressingly makes sense. And
if they did raise it just momentarily, his credibility would be undermined, right?
Well, yeah, his party would turn on him for seeming like he's bringing up things that make no sense, right? So the idea that it has to, like, so you're talking about going to the school and saying more money, or going to the school board and saying more money, and that needs to happen, because the groundswell pushing for this has to take place on a constant basis. But at the same time, from the top down has to be pushed at as well, and those things have to be relatively aligned. Now, the reason why I bring this all up is that it's not about everyone being on the same page and having some kind of unified voice. I remember CARFAC a couple years ago, and I'm sure they still use this now, I just haven't seen the pins lately. They had this, like, button that was going around, I think it was in the Rob Ford elections, where it was like, has the artist been paid? That's all it said. And it was this, like, in the arts community, can we all agree that we should all be paid for our time? Not like set amounts, not any kind of minimal thing, just that yes or no. And if it's yes, I'm like, cool. Now can we get the public to agree just to that? And like, let's push it like that bit where it's all of us together, right? So, like, there's this part of me that, because I work in advocacy very actively, and some of it is like on a federal level, and some of it's like on a local or provincial level, or whatever circles that I'm in, there's this whole thing of like, I don't know, like, people that know me know that I'm just going to do whatever I want anyway. Like, I'm going to follow, like, oh yeah, CARFAC's doing this, I'm like, cool. There's a budget recommendation we're putting in, I'm like, oh, that's good. Clayton, we found out you put in your own budget recommendation, like, as a person. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, you know, the board is doing that. I'm like, so? And they're like, well, yeah, but we're doing it. Why are you doing it? I'm like, because I have different opinions than the board. But you're on our board. I'm like, I'm not doing it on behalf of CARFAC. Like, as you said, I'm an individual. Like, are you telling me that I'm not allowed to exercise my rights as a civilian? You know, like, I'm allowed to make recommendations to the government. So is everyone in this room. You know, like, you know, they're like, yeah, but you're like pushing for like foreign exchange and all this other stuff. I'm like, yeah. Has nothing to do with your mandate. I know. Like, I think Ontario should be engaging with other countries on an ongoing basis. I think Ontario should be one of the North American tourism hotspots that has to do entirely with cultural exchange. Why is that, like, confusing? Well, like, but you didn't bring this up at our meeting. I'm like, what does that have to do with the rights of artists in Ontario? Like, if you wanted me to bring it up, I guess I could have. We should talk more, but you know, like I'm not going to be silenced. And there's this feeling of like you all need consent from like this bigger arts group, this anamorphic thing, to kind of have a stance on things. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, if you feel, especially when it's that simple thing of saying, well, I think artists going outside of the country and getting jobs and getting shows there brings more money back into our country. I'm like, so what's the problem with that again? Like, what is their complaint? Oh, because I wasn't putting effort into this circle, or this circle, or this circle. I'm like,
It's another thing too, it's historic. Like when that video was made in '75, Canada did have like a complex about, you know, being the poor cousin to the United States, not really having ever escaped from England. So we would criticize the artists that would go internationally to make their names. Somehow that was like they'd abandoned us. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that world has really changed, and I agree with you.
I want to pick up on trying to link it back to the Massey Commission and I'll come up with another word for it, exploration. And one of the other themes, a lot of the conversation that we're talking about here has to do with dealing with government, has to deal with school boards, has to do with dealing with large bodies that have money to give. I'm, after a 15-year hiatus, I'm just completing an album. I'm going to start touring that, I'm going to start hitting bars, stuff like that, and I'm going to be competing for gigs with people who are more than happy to undercut me, who are more than happy to take that $50, right? If that. So, if it's okay, I'd like to try to move it out of that sort of big umbrella thing and more, because we're talking about, as the artist being paid, we're talking about that sort of person-to-person relationship. How does that look on the ground? What are some of the things that we can be doing? I have no trouble saying to a guy, what the hell are you doing taking that? You're putting the rest of us out of work. But
so the one thing that I was going to say that it just ties into that a bit is that I'm not also trying to stop people from aligning with bigger collectives, but it shouldn't be a barrier for you aligning with that collective. So if you need to feel that that's a way to find voice, to gain voice, to have that presence, then so be it. I mean, like, I'm a very lucky person. I write as a columnist whenever the hell I want, and I find ways of publishing my stuff. So if, like, I go into a town and someone decides to pick a fight, I'm like, I don't throw punches, I throw words, but the public hears them. And that's the big difference, is that, you know, like, paying somebody properly for their time, who doesn't believe that, you know what I mean? Like, everyone agrees with that.
And recently, too, a friend was posting on Facebook publicly asking all of her friends, how much should I pay for? How much should I ask as an individual artist, no agent, no one to sell her, no one to tell her how much she should get paid for this? But she publicly went out there, how much should I get paid for doing my work? So again, her mention was, because I asked for this amount, and I found out when I was working with the group that they're actually getting paid more, so did I undersell myself? And so as individuals too, I think, you know, trying to understand what am I worth with my skills and my artistry, right? Like, yeah, being in a band, quick story, the bar back home, the little current bar there, we play before, when I first started playing there, the fellow would just offer the band $250 flat. That's it, nothing, right? So if you're a 5-piece band, that's what, $50, right? 6-piece band, 4-piece, right? So it's in that range of $70. And then I don't know who it was, but I think people started to complain to the owner of that bar, and $250 is a ripoff, man. You know, all this great music we're rehearsing for, what, 2 weeks before, and you're offering $250. So he got rid of that basic fee, and now he allows the bands to charge their entrance fee. And so there's the gamble for the owner. Well, if you only get 5 people, there you go. Right? But if you pack that house, then there's a lot more money that these artists are receiving, right? So it was a good thing that he actually took those words in and took that off the table, right? So now, the last time I played there, so now we get a $30 drinking tab, right? Those used to be all-night tabs, but we get $30, and then all that entrance fee goes to us, right? And I walked out of there with $85 plus $30 in booze, so that's $105 compared to $50, right? Which is a little bit more better. And for me, the value in that is like, I already know these songs, so I didn't have to practice much, I didn't have to learn anything. So for me, that was a good balance in there. $105, that's good. A little bit more. Josh, yeah, go ahead. Who wants it?
Well, I was just wondering if I could speak. So I think that when we were talking a little bit about the idea that people coming in and willing to undercut what the artist is kind of saying, this is what it's worth. I think that there's been this weird thing built around paying your dues. I know that right now I'm as a young theater administrator, and what I do, I am paying my dues. What my dues are is working around the clock to try and find other resources so that the money that I've been allocated to make my show happen goes to the artists that are involved. That's paying my dues. Someone coming in and saying, well, I'm willing to work for free because it's paying my dues. That's a broken system that's kind of been ingrained in us when we start. Oh, it's going to start off really tough to make a go of it. That's true, but I think we're looking at it in the wrong way. I know you should work for free. It's called paying your dues. That's garbage because then we're facilitating this system where new artists keep coming in and saying, no, don't pay what being asked for. Don't pay what that artist rightfully deserves. I'll do it for less. That's broken, and I think that's an artist support and education stream that needs to kind of happen. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that what you were saying, Bruce, is like more of like the artists having more ownership and control a little bit over like the venue and the action. So it becomes a partnership between the space and your band, and therefore you're sharing the risk, but then the benefits are higher for yourself, especially in this success scenario. And the Fringe Festival that Josh and I are part of, like to be a Fringe Festival, you have to be part of the Canadian Association of Fringe Festivals, and that's for the United States as well, which is super weird that Canada actually has dominion over the US. So like if we go to these conferences, like the New York Fringe Festival is there in Canada because it's the Association of Fringe Festivals, it just has Canada in the name. Like you have to have certain like non-jury, like they put conditions of non-juried systems in place, which is an exact contradiction to most government funding in Canada. And I'm an administrator, so I'm stepping into this world and I'm at these conferences and I'm like, so why did you come up with this? And I mean, I'm not complaining in a way because the artists, by having 100% of the ticket sales at the door going to them, and the festival being like more of a theater incubator to launch things and not as a programmed showcase, the artists are actually paid more for the most part than if we were programming it. So there's like a higher benefit to the artists, and it's easier to get into to kind of get those things going, right? But I was like, but why did you go and make it that you had to do it that way? Because it's very hard to navigate that in the government system. And as a National Arts Service Organization, this umbrella of the Fringe Festivals, I was like, I'm surprised that your interactions with the Canada Council have led you to this. And they're like, what's an arts service organization? And I'm like, what? And they're like, never communicated with the Canada Council, never had a meeting, has no communication with any other infrastructure. They just came up with it completely on their own. And I was just like, oh. And then there's that thing where it's like, you just like assume that everyone's talking, that it's all working well. And then you realize like, no, like when you have to establish that relationship, every town has to establish that relationship. Every festival has to figure out their boundaries. Right now, the Fringe is putting a call for submissions in that's generic for projects and getting a programming committee together and having a lottery so that there's 2 streams of programming so that we're eligible to get government money and still be allowed to be a Fringe festival. And I'm like laughing on the phone with the Canada Council rep about how like, you want to talk about hoops you got to jump through just to be allowed to do what you're doing. you know, like, but that's it. It's not like this is how it works. Like, people don't know how it works. It's very frustrating.
The Fringe gets free promotion from Heritage if anyone reads the guidelines. So we've made a special little mention of we allow for the Fringe Festival payment model within what our eligibility criteria are. I'm cognizant of time. I saw a hand up there, and Bruce, I know you want to jump in. 2 hands here, 3 hands. Okay, so let's carry things on. Nora?
Nora from OAC. Just a couple of things that I wanted to share from when I took the MBA. I did the MBA at Schulich, and I did a negotiations class. And there's a thing called anchoring that happens, and it's the person who puts the first number on the table. That's a power move. And so when you say the number, you actually, that's where the negotiations start, and it anchors. The number anchors in your mind, and you end up slightly above or below that number. It won't deviate too far. So when the person comes in and says, I can give you $50, and you're like, okay, make it 75, that is, you've already given away your power, right? And if you're going in and saying, I want to get paid this much money, that actually becomes the starting point, and you'll end up lower. So if you need that much money, you have to say a higher number, and that's how it works. The other really important thing about it, and so by setting minimums, we're not doing ourselves a favor. I'm just going to say that. The other thing is, in negotiations, negotiation isn't about finding shared interests, it's about finding out what your different interests are. So that solution with the bar was great, because you're like, I want to get paid a decent amount of money. He's like, you bring more people in and I will pay you a decent amount of money, and if you bring more people in, I'll get more money at the bar.
Yeah.
Like, it's win-win, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it just has to do with, like, let's actually examine this model, because you've now created a situation where it's not on the presenter anymore to drum up business and market the show. You're doing that work. You're bringing your audience, and you're not just something he's paying out. You're not just an expense. You're actually bringing him money.
Yeah.
He's happy to pay you that, right? So I think that's a really interesting way of, like, exploding it, and to be like, you know what? If you can't afford me, and I guess I'm going back to, like, money isn't the only resource, right? There's so much in-kind exchange. There's so much bartering. There's so much, like, what do you have that I need, that I can give you? How can we make this of value to both of us? And I think, like, we get stuck in the money conversation, and money's important, don't get me wrong. Money is really important, but I think we need to explode our ideas of, like, what the resources are actually in the system, and how do we share resources, and, like, I have artists, you have a space, you have marketing expertise, like, how do we, like, come together and bring what we have to the table in order to create something that's about, like, more value to everyone.
Thanks, Nora. Kathy?
Thank you, David. So I'm really interested in the question of sort of the process as opposed to the end product, especially in training, right? So one of the things that happens in our program, so I'm with Canadian Heritage, we're funders, and we're very concerned about outcomes for our programs, because we have to be accountable back to Parliament for how we spend public money.
Yep.
So it's really important to be able to show what's happening through a training program. But when it comes to training, we often get it wrong in that we're looking for, like, levels that are, you're laughing, right? You know this conversation. So I would be really, and I don't know, like, I mean, I know this might be a different conversation, but just about that process, like, it's moving the bar on somebody's development as an artist. Like, to be able to capture that is, I think, really, really important and interesting.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah.
Let's do a round, and then we're going to have to sum up.
So going back to the rural being up in the north, that's exactly, like, we are having that conversation with DCH, and we're asking to change the language. we don't, like, we're asked, how many directors did you graduate this year? We don't create directors. We don't make directors. We create artists. After some point when you're creating, you automatically become the director. If you're creating something, let's say we're with our group here, right? And somebody has the idea, somebody sees the vision, somebody sees how it leads up. They automatically take on that role. So am I developing a director? I don't know. But does he see himself moving in a vision and carrying on then in that way? And again, being in the rural area, we don't have a 500-seat house. We don't have production rooms. We don't have all of these big theater things that we see in the city. And I think that's one of the major complications here is the city mentality has all of that. So when you come up here and you look north, you don't got a theater, you don't got any of this. But then when you don't come and see us and you don't know what our world is, then you only have the mentality of the big theater, of the big works, of these fancy lighting cues, great sound scores and all of that stuff. But when you come to the north, like I'm going to tell you, Debajehmujig didn't have a creation center for like, since the beginning of its time. It's like only 9 years old that our building is. So we didn't have any of that. We were part of PAC, Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. We couldn't align up with that. It's like you're an A host, B, C, D. Actually, we're probably a Z, right? We couldn't fit into that. We couldn't sell ourselves into that world, into that model that they set up for Canadian theaters. So right off the bat, we couldn't even fit into what was laid out there for professional Canadian theaters. We looked at it and it was like, well, I guess we can't even join that. We could try, but we're not going to be able to uphold to what they're talking about in there. So again, like when we do we're creating artists, but it's not in the classroom. It's not in the school. So our language is totally different. We have traditional teachings that we incorporate into our cultural mentality is keep your culture in your hearts and create from there, right? And that doesn't get talked about in how does an artist learn. But it's the bigger picture that's already been put out in front of us that we have to adhere to. So it's like, who makes the change? Oh, you can hear us trying to make the change, right? So it's now, again, it's looking down. It's the people up on top who have to come and see us. So one thing, when Justin Trudeau went over to the one place to deal with the water crisis, and said, don't go for a day, stay there for a month and deal with what they're dealing with, right? So it's, that whole mentality is not here. So it's like, great, come to the north. That's the whole thing. Come up and see us. Live our life and not what you think it is because you hear stuff, right? And that's one of the greater advocacies I like to do. And that's one of my major statements is come and visit us. Come and look at us. Come and take in what we have to offer. Not at a show either. It's like come during the working times, like see us working and see what the difference is working in the classroom and when we take our group out into the bush and we're learning traditional stuff in there, right? Else all I have to say about that.
Yeah, part of the culture thing too is you notice there's this culture that's not everyone knows about, but there's these town cultures that they're all unique to their own selves as a whole, and part of that too, they have their resources too right there. And that what Bruce was saying about the directors and your light designer and all that, we developed that ourselves, but we did get people come in to train us. But those are tools we have now. And yeah, so the culture part of it, knowing what your culture is, I guess, or what your language is, or how do you present that language on stage to create this Canadian culture. What is that culture looking like to us, I guess, as an artist? Like we followed the Odawa Madewan teachings, and that's our foundation right there, and that's part of culture right there. So every teaching we use, we're using it in a daily life too. We're living those teachings. So we live those things. We use them on stage. We use them as concepts, ideas to make the presentation flow. And that's like our ideas and concepts right there. And that's what we go with to present our performances or music or whatever it may be, installations. And I think that's really important, that aspect of that. But when we always have to follow these other guidelines, that's part of the part that I don't worry about. The administrators worry about that, I guess. so that's the part that I don't really, I guess, think about. But should the artists be thinking about that stuff? Should they know more about that stuff that are just doing the groundwork?
So we won't. So I've got some. I'm wrapping it up really fast. I got so much I'd love to say, but I'm not going to do it. So I got these papers here. They're written by Greg Curnow from like 1992. I think I only got like 9. And I've like I don't have permission to be doing this, but I am in discussions with his estate to find out whether this could get published digitally because I found it in like a box of old magazines. And it had like a weird handwritten note saying like, oh, it was handed to me by this person when they did a lecture, and these people were talking about Greg Curnow, and it's a paper by Greg Curnow that someone else gave out. So then I've like added that like I gave this paper out at this event to it, and then like maybe someday you'll photocopy it and someone else will happen and it'll be weird. But like in the end, I thought that this was so valid because it's about people starting like these co-ops in artist-run culture, and they're like it starts with them like ripping off like construction sites to get materials to actually do their space, and I'm like, wow, my whole artist-run center is built on vigilante criminals. But in the end, it's like it's just this kind of raw, honest criticism about like where things were going, and it's like it's like what is it called? 5 co-op galleries in Toronto and London from 1957 to 1992, and it was presented, and like the talk was in like 92 or 93. But the thing is, like, they're talking about things that's, again, it sounds like right now. Like you're like, oh yeah, we're really concerned about the institutionalization of these spaces, and they're going to lose the core of what they were originally. I'm like, oh boy, that sounds familiar. Anyway, so I'm just going to leave these here. Whoever wants them can take one. There's only 9. Sorry I didn't make more, but I ran out of paper. I have so much I want to agree with you, but instead of doing that, I'm going to say, after we're done, I want to meet outside. We're going to do a photo op. That's it. I brought my Panono 360 camera. What? Oh, I remember what it was I wanted to say. Oh, I want to thank SPARC for inadvertently programming 3 Indigenous people on a panel that has nothing to do with indigeneity.
Yay!
We're talking about artist rights and not like being trotted out as kind of like indigenous something, like some reconciliation panel, which I'm just sick of sitting on. So.
Clayton, you're going to hate what I'm about to say then.
Oh, okay.
Oh, don't say it.
Well, I'm going to say it because I think, I don't know, as I was listening to Bruce and Ashley, it just struck me that, Liz, you'd mentioned there used to be a community arts organization. It was like a service organization. It doesn't exist anymore. It strikes me that what the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective does represents the spirit of what that community arts organization was to do. And it's because the indigeneity of, it's a holistic approach. Everything is connected. That's what your work represents that. And you talked about the teachings that are involved. So it's not just about the artistic practice. If I had a crystal ball, I'd say that we have we as a group of people who are going to be here and share our journey together. A part of the development and the discovery that we're going to go through is how indigeneity, the nature of a holistic culture, brings value to everything. Because we've lost, I think as settlers, we've lost a lot of understanding of what is the value of the land and the water and the spirits around us. So, not to place any pressure on you guys, but will be, a lot of cues will come from how the leadership you provide, just the knowledge that's there. Yeah. So I thank you for that, Bruce, and thank you, Ashley, thank you, Clayton. Thanks to everyone. Do you want to add a last word, Liz?
Well, I wanted to give kind of a heads up to folks in the room, since we're all interested in here to talk about artists and incomes. OTF has invested in a collective impact project that's a collaborative of many organizations, including CARFAC Ontario, being led by Work and Culture. And it's trying to get really underneath this issue of the precarious incomes of artists, but cultural workers as well. And in our discussion, we didn't veer too much that way, but I'd had a discussion with the founding artistic director of the River and Sky Festival yesterday, who was like, I pay my artists, I don't get to pay myself. So that's a whole other piece of this. But anyhow, this project is just starting to get going right now. And simultaneously, Work and Culture is going across the province doing roundtables, researching it's a labor market research project, so we can actually get accurate data on artists' incomes. Because part of what measures or what counts gets measured, and we need to have really accurate, better data about artists and their incomes and cultural workers and their incomes, and right now we don't have that through Statistics Canada. So if you are interested in kind of participating in any of those roundtables, come and see me, because I'm kind of supporting them around their invite list to those roundtables. And if you're interested in this collective impact project, give me your name and I will pass that along to Working Culture as somebody to reach out to.
I'm just going to jump in really quick because it ties in directly to what you're saying. I'm doing a presentation at 2 o'clock, and it's a presentation more than a conversation. Stems out of the work that David and I were doing like 20 years ago. But it's a business planning session, and it's geared towards artists and cultural sector workers. It comes out of a webinar that I did for Work and Culture a couple of months ago. And it's tailored. A lot of the time, I think I've found that these business planning for artists things are a business person who's saying, okay, I'm a widget maker, you make your widgets, this is how you market your widgets, that sort of thing. I'm coming at it from the perspective of an artist, as an artist, and we grow from that place, okay? So that it'll deal with some of the things that are a bit more relevant to you guys.
Also someone who would be a successful fringe festival goer, the person that knows to take an opportunity to invite you to their show. Like,
awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.